love the sound of falling snow. It's kind of like watching lightning or seeing a shooting star. It's just one of those unique things you have no control over that doesn't always present itself. But when it does, it's a treat. I'm not really the hiking type, but when it's snowing out, I just can't help myself. We've all got those irresistible cravings. This happened during one of those snowy nights. I live in a woodsy area. It's not really in the woods per se, but it's close enough. If I wanted to access an expansive, dense forest, I'd only have to drive a few minutes. I didn't have any major obligations the next day, so it was either a Friday or Saturday. Probably a Saturday, because I remember being slightly hungover from going out the previous night. It also wasn't supposed to snow that night, which I remember specifically because I have a habit of checking the weather obsessively during the winter months. I was sitting in my room reading a book when it just started snowing abruptly, as if someone had just casually flipped a switch. I didn't even notice it at first, but by the time I realized what was going on, there was already a considerable amount of snow on the ground. Without thinking too much, I instantly knew what I wanted to do: take a snow walk. So that's what I did. The spot I drove to is pretty secluded for the most part. It's a local hiking trail that usually doesn't see that much traffic. I stepped out, admired the snowfall for a few seconds, and started walking. I didn't really have a defined plan in my mind. My only objective was to get deeper into the woods so I could more fully appreciate the snow. After about 20 minutes of walking, I was finally satisfied with how far I'd gone. But then, the literal moment, I stopped to appreciate the snow. I heard something that definitely didn't belong there. It was a child's voice. It took me a few moments to even process what I heard. Just as I was telling myself, my mind was playing tricks on me. I heard it again, the sound of a little boy yelling, "Hi." I know that sounds pretty benign, but it was just so freaky in the moment. It was quite literally the last thing I was expecting to hear out there, all alone in those woods. The other unsettling thing about it was that I couldn't really tell where the voice had come from. It sounded like it could have come from a number of different directions, if that makes any sense. I whipped my head around, but there was no one there. I kept looking around frantically, but there was no one in sight. Just as I was about to head back to my car, I heard the voice again. It was definitely a little boy's voice. Only this time, he said "up here, silly," without even processing how freaky of a thing that is to say. I instinctively looked up, and there he was. There was a little boy who looked to be around 9 years old, just sitting on a tree branch in a tree, not too far away. It was the most bizarre thing. The boy was clearly bundled up for the cold. But how he managed to climb that tree, I had no idea. The lowest branch to the ground was at least 20 feet off the ground. Strangely, seeing him kind of calmed me down a little. It was almost like I had been afraid of not knowing where he was, as opposed to him being there. I walked over to the tree he was sitting on, keeping my eyes on him the entire time he was smiling. This really wide grin that reminded me of the expression someone who hadn't learned to smile yet would make. My sense of security started disappearing. The more I looked around though, for starters, there wasn't a single footprint around the tree he was sitting in, meaning he had climbed up there before it had started snowing, meaning he had been sitting in that tree for at least 45 minutes. And that's not even mentioning the fact that he figured out a way to climb that thing in the first place. Like I said, it would have been exceedingly difficult to do so even if you had climbing experience. The tree was perfect, straight. He would have had to shimmy up 20 feet. He waved at me, and I didn't waste a second. I asked him how he got up there, and he told me it was a secret. Then he just went back to smiling, that awful grin. I didn't know what to do. This kid clearly didn't belong out there, and I felt compelled to do something. What was I supposed to do? Try and climb the tree to get him down before I could think of something to say. He stood up straight on the branch he had been sitting on and said, "Watch this." Then, without warning, he leaned back and fell. He fell what must have been at least 30 feet. I screamed. There was nothing else I could do. I watched in horror as he landed directly on his back with a gruesome thud. I thought he was dead. There's no way any amount of snow could have cushioned that fall. I ran over to him, but before I could reach him, he sprung up off the ground and started running away from me. It was impossible falling from that height. Should have been enough to kill him. I screamed again, this time out of shock, and I watched as he ran off deeper into the woods. Even with the bright snow on the ground, it was still dark enough for him to run out of sight. I don't know what came over me. Instead of doing the rational thing and turning around, I ran after him. I don't know why. I know myself, if a situation like that were to arise again, I turn around 99 times out of 10, but I guess this was just that one time. That's the only explanation I can come up with. I regained my composure and started following his footprints, knowing he couldn't have gotten far. After a few seconds of running, I started to hear him laughing. Cackling is a better word. Honestly, it was really unsettling. It was like he was toying with me, playing a game while I was out there scared to death. His footprints passed a nearby tree, and as I was running past, I felt something latch onto my back before I could react. I was tumbling to the ground, and this kid was on top of me, clawing at my neck and shoulders. I started screaming and blindly grabbed at him, but he wasn't letting go. He started wailing too, and I could feel myself starting to bleed. He was tearing into my neck with his fingernails, and I thought he was gonna blind me. I managed to stand back up, and with all my strength, I flung him over my shoulder. He hit the ground immediately, got up and ran deeper into the woods, still laughing. This time I didn't chase him. If it weren't for the cuts on my neck and the blood on my hands, and might have just stood there forever. The cuts didn't feel that deep, but there was an uncomfortable amount of blood. I hadn't been wearing a scarf, so I pulled off my hat and wrapped it tightly around my neck. My hands were shaking and soaked with my own blood, and I was having a panic attack. The next 20 minutes are really fuzzy, probably because I was so terrified and I had lost so much blood. The next thing I remember is being in the back of an ambulance, and then after that, I remember talking to some police officers about what happened. I got the medical attention I needed and was asked to recount my story like 10 times. At the time, I didn't realize what was so unbelievable about it. I would only later learn that while I had been in the hospital, the police had searched the area and found nothing. What's worse? They allegedly followed my footprints and only found the one set mine. I remember being so emotionally distraught when I found that out. I was furious at the thought that they hadn't searched the woods thoroughly. But why would they lie? By the time I was discharged from the UND, done talking to police officers, I didn't have much energy to do anything other than sleep. I can't remember if this was the day after or 2 days after. Like I said, things got a bit fuzzy, but I eventually went back to that hiking trail. It had snowed considerably since then, so it wasn't too surprising to find that my footprints had been snowed in. I searched the entire forest. It must have taken me hours, but there was no sign anyone had been there. This is still one of the freakiest things that has ever happened to me, or anyone I personally know. This happened over winter break, my sophomore year of college. I was 19 and had the house to myself for a little under 2 weeks. During the second week, a massive snowstorm hit. The forecasts were predicting something crazy, and they definitely weren't lying. By the time I woke up that Saturday, there was already close to a foot on the ground, and it was still coming down. Hard plows couldn't keep up, and by late afternoon, the roads were basically impassable. I should mention that my neighborhood is in your typical suburban setup. The houses are pretty spread out, and there's a lot of wooded areas between properties. It's nice in the summer, but in the winter, it can feel kind of isolated that day, with the snow piling up and no cars on the road. It felt even more so. I was bored out of my mind by like 6 p.m. The Wi-Fi knocked out while I was sleeping, so I couldn't even pass the time by playing video games or anything. For context, my only hometown friend is this guy named Ryan, and I knew he was around because I had literally hung out with him the day before. So, while I was dying of boredom in my room, I got this idea that I thought was hilarious at the time. I was gonna walk to his house and surprise him. The roads were undrivable, sure, but I figured I could make it on foot. It was only about 1.5 miles, maybe a little more. I'd walked further than that. Plenty of times looking back, it was a pretty stupid idea. But I was 19 and bored, and thought it would be funny to just show up on his doorstep, covered in snow. The first part of the walk was actually kind of nice. The snow had stopped falling by then, and everything was covered in this thick white blanket. The streetlights made everything low, and it was weirdly peaceful. I could hear my own breathing and the crunch of my boots, but that was about it. There wasn't a living thing out there about halfway there. The route cuts through this stretch where there aren't any houses for a while. It's mostly just trees on both sides of the road and a few empty lots. During the day, it's nothing special, but that night, especially with all that snow, it felt different. That's when it really hit me, how alone I was. It was a really strange feeling. I kept walking, and out of nowhere I saw headlights up ahead. The lights were pretty far off, but they were coming from the direction I was headed. I stopped walking and watched them get closer. It was definitely a snowplow, and it was moving really slowly. But then, out of nowhere, it suddenly veered hard to the right, like the driver had lost control or was trying to avoid something. I watched them cut across the road and disappear into the tree line. There was this muffled crunching sound, and then everything went quiet again. My first thought was that someone had just crashed, so I started running toward where I'd seen the lights go off the road. The snow was deep, and I couldn't move that fast. But the only thing on my mind was the thought that someone was hurt and needed help. It took me a few minutes to reach the spot. I could see where the vehicle had gone off the road, so I followed the tire tracks until I found it. The scene looked exactly as I predicted: a snowplow with its front end crumpled and smashed into a tree. Its headlights were still on, and the engine was still running. I ran up to the driver's side, preparing myself to have to lift someone through the snow. But when I got to the window and looked inside, there was no one there. The driver's seat was empty. I stood there for a second, not really processing what I was seeing. I thought maybe the driver had been thrown from the vehicle or something, so I looked around. The windshield wasn't shattered though, so they must have still been inside the plow. I checked the passenger, but that seat was also empty. I ended up pulling the driver's door open in frustration, thinking maybe they had slumped down below the steering wheel, but there was no one there either. It took me a few seconds to realize that the entire plow was empty. There was quite literally nowhere else someone could have been. I remember just standing there in the snow, staring at this wrecked snowplow, with its headlights still on and its engine still running, feeling like something was very, very wrong. There were no footprints leading away from the truck. Whoever had been driving the thing had just vanished. It's hard for me to describe what I felt next. I got this sudden, overwhelming sense that I needed to leave. It wasn't a thought so much as a feeling, like something in my gut was forcing me to get out of there. I trusted my gut and backed away from the plow. As I was walking back, the way I had came, I heard a voice ring out from somewhere behind me. It was a man's voice, and he was yelling for help. I wanted to turn around and help. That was my goal in the first place, but every instinct I had was screaming at me to keep moving. I started running, and as I got further away, I heard the voice yell out one more time. It sounded much closer the second time, like impossibly close. No one could have moved that fast through such deep snow. I didn't turn around. I ran the entire rest of the way to Ryan's house. The joke was pretty much ruined at that point. I must have looked insane when his mom answered the door. I explained what happened, and Ryan's dad ended up calling the police, and the time it took the police to get out there and back amidst all that snow. Ryan and I had gone back and forth about what I'd seen probably a dozen times. He kept asking if maybe I imagined it, or if maybe the driver had walked away before I got there. But I knew for a fact that my eyes hadn't been playing tricks on me. When the police got to Ryan's house, they revealed something horrifying. Apparently they hadn't found any tire tracks on that round at all. They had searched the entire road, but there was no sign that a plow had ever even been there. The officer actually accused me of making the entire thing up, and I had to argue my case. I was practically begging them to believe me. The officer ended up just leaving, and there was nothing I could do about it. I stayed at Ryan's that night. I didn't want to walk back home in the dark, and honestly, I don't think I could have, even if I wanted to. The next morning, after the plows had finally cleared the roads, Ryan's dad drove me home. I've thought about that night a lot since then, and every time I do, I come to the unfortunate conclusion that what happened to me is just one of those unexplainable things. I guess it's possible that I hallucinated the whole thing, but that terrifies me just as much. I am Sebastian, and I go by Sebi. This happened back when I was a sophomore in high school, about 7 years ago now. I went to a private school in a nearby city, which meant I had to commute on public transportation every day. Train in the morning, train in the afternoon. It sounds tedious, but honestly I didn't mind it. Most of my friends lived in the same general area, so we'd all ride together, and it became this social thing where we'd just hang out and talk during the commute. One of the hidden benefits of private school, honestly, getting people accustomed to commuting early in life. I was a runner back then. Track in the spring, cross country. Fall, during the off-season, I'd catch the train right after school. Let out around 3, and it would be pretty empty. Usually just the same group of high schoolers heading home. But during the season, practice wouldn't wrap up until after 5:30, which meant by the time I got in the train, it was packed with commuters, heading back to the suburbs after. Luckily, my two best friends, Charles and James, also ran track and lived on the same train line, so I wasn't completely alone during those late rides. One night, after track practice, it started snowstorming. The moment our train left the station, it was midwinter, so night is definitely the right term, even though it wasn't even 6 yet. And snowstorm is also the right term because it went from 0 to full-on blizzard in like 5 minutes. We found out while we were on the train that ours was the last one operating on that track. The forecast was predicting a massive storm, and they weren't letting any more trains leave the station after us. The snow only got worse at one point. The three of us were genuinely wondering if the train was even gonna make it to each of our stops. And even so, we quickly realized there was no way our parents could drive to pick us up. The roads were already a mess, so even if we made it to our respective stations, we'd have no choice but to walk home. For James and Charles, that wasn't a huge deal. They were practically next-door neighbors in a pretty lively, dense part of town. Plus, their houses weren't that far from the station. For me, though, it was different. My station was isolated. I'd have to cross a highway and then walk over a mile in this woodsy stretch to get home. I called my parents from the train and explained the situation. They told me I didn't have much of a choice. My dad told me to just suck it up, bundle up, and be careful. James and Charles got off at their stop, and I adapted them goodbye. The rest of the ride was just me and a handful of other passengers, and by the time we reached my station, I was the only one left. The doors opened, and I stepped out onto the platform. It was completely empty. Just me and a full blizzard. It was dark, but there was decent visibility because of the snow. Everything was white, and the light from the station reflected off of it in this pretty but eerie way. I stood there for a second, taking it in. It was a sight I had never seen before. Usually that station is bustling with cars and people, but with the snowstorm and all, it looked completely deserted. I started walking. There was no point in prolonging the inevitable. For whatever reason, I thought crossing the highway would have been more difficult. But there wasn't a single car anywhere in sight, including I actually stopped and looked around, kind of in awe. It was beautiful, in a weird way. I started thinking to myself, I'd probably never experienced anything like that, ever again. After the highway, though, came the woods. The only other option was following the road home, but it was really windy, and would have added a ton more walking, so I decided to just push through and walk through the woods. I don't know how long I'd been walking, but I happened to glance up after looking down at my feet for a while, and the moment I did, I had to hold back a yell about 30 yards ahead of me. There was someone standing there, a man. He was facing me directly, almost like he knew the exact path I had to take. At first, my brain couldn't process what I was seeing because he wasn't dressed for the weather at all. He was wearing a short-sleeved shirt and shorts in the middle of a blizzard. And to make things worse, his face was twisted in this deranged smile. I didn't move. I just stood there watching him, waiting to see what he was going to do. My mind was racing, trying to come up with some explanation, but the shock of the situation was too much for me to handle. I couldn't think or move, and in one abrupt motion, he went from smiling and standing still to screaming and charging at me. It was literal horror unfolding right in front of me. I snapped out of my haze and began running as fast as I could, back the way I came, screaming for help. Even though I knew no one was out there, I couldn't move that fast with all the snow, and I felt him closing the gap with every second that passed. The chase felt like it lasted forever. It was probably 5 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I finally broke out of the woods and hit the road, and only then did I turn around. He was gone, and that didn't make me feel much better, though I felt physically sick. I followed the road home, and the whole time I kept thinking about my footprints, about how they were quite literally the only tracks in the snow. If that guy wanted to follow me home, it would have been the easiest thing in the world. When I finally got to my house, my parents were relieved. That is, until I told them what had happened in the woods. My dad wanted to go out and look for the guy, but my mom wouldn't let him. Several hours went by without incident. Eventually, my parents went to sleep. I pretended like everything was fine, but I was still freaking out internally. I couldn't get the image of his deranged smile out of my head, and the way he had been screaming was just so unnatural. And the more I thought about it, the more insane the whole thing felt. He had literally been wearing short sleeves. How had he not frozen to death? Out there, I was making myself crazy, so I forced myself to stop thinking about it and just go to sleep. But of course, I couldn't fall asleep. It was like I was in that 30-second shock after waking up from a nightmare, only instead of 30 seconds, it was several hours. That's the best way I can describe how I was feeling. At one point, I heard a tree branch rattle my bedroom window, which startled me out of bed. I went over to the window to see if I could dislodge it somehow. I pulled back the curtain and literally dropped to the floor, yelling it was him, that guy from earlier. He was right there, inches from my window. Only now I could see him. Clearly his skin was purple, like he was freezing to death, and he was bald with his patchy gray beard. My dad burst into the room and just barely saw that guy through the window before he took off. My dad went to go run out in the snow, but my mom stopped him and convinced him to call the police instead, which he did. With all the snow on the grounds, it took the police forever to get to our house. By the time they did, that guy was long gone. My dad didn't care, though the police could have easily tracked his footprints in the snow, which is what I was expecting them to do. But once the officers realized the tracks led into the woods behind our house, they told us they couldn't just go tramping through the woods in the middle of the night. My dad got furious. He got in one of the officers' faces and almost made it physical. In the end, the officers literally left without doing a thing. Nothing ever came of it. The police never bothered to follow up, and I never saw that man again. For all I know, he froze to death somewhere behind my house. But for weeks after that, I was terrified to be in my own home. I still have absolutely no idea how to explain what happened. Not to get too deep into backstory, nor disclose too much personal information about myself, but I'll just come right out and say it, that I've always been a reclusive person. Ever since I was a young kid, I didn't have many friends at all, and I spent most of my time playing video games on the computer or varying consoles I grew up with. As I got older, like high school, I started to get into just going on long walks, exploring. I'd walk through the woods, walk through cemeteries, and then I developed an obsession with trespassing, going places I wasn't supposed to be. It started with sneaking into cemeteries at night. Then I started getting more experimental with it, like exploring abandoned hospitals and schools. When I was finally able to drive, it made accessing all these places much easier. Of course, I only went with one of my few friends once or twice. Honestly, I enjoyed it more by myself. Part of my weirdness includes the fact that I don't get scared exploring abandoned places at night by myself. Or perhaps I should use past tense and say I didn't used to get scared. How I used to find a lot of abandoned structures was simpler than you might think. I would just go on Google Earth and zoom into rural areas. Then I would look for abandoned-looking structures and unsuspecting places. I would then make a list of 5 to 10 locations of these structures and try to visit them all in one day. Sometimes they wouldn't be abandoned at all, but I eventually got pretty good at gauging which ones would be this hobby involved. A lot of walking through woods, and yes, before you ask, I did have a job. I worked a minimum wage job as a stock boy at a supermarket. So when I wasn't doing that, or in school, a lot of time I was doing this. One of the places on my list one day turned out to be an abandoned little church. I had to park on a dirt road and get out of my car to walk. There was about a 10-minute walk. I'd always wear jeans and boots so that I travel faster through the woods without hurting myself. I started noticing old rusted garbage cans and other junk scattered in the woods, indicating I must have been close. And then I saw the clearing of the distance approaching, along with the structure. And there it was, some dilapidated old church, sitting in a random clearing in the woods. It had an old well right in front of the building. I walked over to it to see if it had been sealed, but surprisingly it hadn't been. I looked down and it was so deep that it was pitch black down there. When I stopped and listened though, I heard something down there. It was a faint clicking sound. It happens like on a rhythm, 1 click after 2 seconds. It didn't sound like water droplets. The best I could describe it is a stick being tapped on a stone wall. Curious, I stared down for longer than I probably should have, kind of like I was hypnotized by the sound. But eventually I broke out of my daze and decided to go inside the church. I stepped onto the creaking wood porch, and the rotted boards gave slightly under my weight. The large double doors were ajar. Not surprising. Out of all the abandoned structures I visited, unless it was a very well-known one, posted frequently, and been subreddits, there wouldn't really be anyone boarding these places up. I pushed one door open further, which led to a loud groan that echoed through the trees. The air inside was thick with dust, and the scent of old woodlight poured through the shattered stained glass windows. Some of the pews were overturned, or missing entirely. The pulpit stood crooked at the fronts, and behind it, an arched doorway led further into darkness. I did the usual, scanned the inside with my flashlight, and took a few pictures from my archive on my digital camera. There was an eerie beauty to the decay, a holy place like a church near ruin. It was beautiful, but tragic. I walked slowly toward the back of the church where the arched doorway was. I stepped through it and found a narrow hallway that led to what looked like old storage rooms. One door was missing entirely, and the others were splintered or hanging off their hinges. Cobwebs clung to the ceiling everywhere. And then I saw at the end of the hallway was a stairway leading down into the basement jackpot. I thought, like I said, I used to not let anything scare me. Nothing within reason, at least. Something about exploring abandoned basements excited me, but this time, something about that basement door hanging open, leading to the darkness below, made me pause. I, honest to God, got a slight chill, but I kept going. I started down the stairs slowly, and each step creaked so loud that I feared I'd fall through the wood. And then I counted 7 steps until my right foot landed on one. That gave way with a loud crack, and before I could react, it collapsed under me. I fell hard and landed in a pile of junk and dirt below the stairs. I fell directly on my ass and hurt my tailbone. I let out some kind of audible complaint, probably a goddammit or something. My flashlight flew out of my hands, so I crawled over to grab it. That was when I heard a voice. It was a higher-pitched sounding voice, either a woman or a young boy. It was saying words, but I couldn't understand any of them except for one thing. They said, "Hello." The rest was gibberish, like someone trying to talk but didn't know how. I stood up and pointed the flashlight around. It was just an old basement. Some busted furniture, mostly cots, a dirt floor, stone walls. But then, I saw a tunnel on the wall. It looked like it was dug out by hand. As I approached it, I realized the voice was coming from down there. I started walking toward it. I was being dumb, but I had to know what it was. I stepped just a couple of steps inside the tunnel and looked around. The walls were rough, not smooth. It had definitely been dug out with a shovel by hand. My flashlight started flickering and I nearly had a heart attack. I hit it a few times and it stayed on. Doing so made a louder noise than I anticipated, though the voice got louder. Still just gibberish with that same weird tone, but I can now confirm it was coming from deeper inside this tunnel, and then it stopped. Everything was quiet for a few seconds. Then I heard a click 2 seconds later, another click, same rhythm and sound as the well, and the sound echoed. These clicks and the gibberish echoing voice were getting louder. My heart was now in my throat, so I turned and ran back. I reached the stairs and remembered one of the steps was broken. I found it easier to grab the sides of the stairs and pull myself up instead of trying to hop over the broken step. My flashlight dropped, but it didn't matter. I was leaving the basement back to the light of the upstairs. I got to the top and didn't look back. I ran through the hallway, through the main room, and out the front doors. I ran past the well and stopped for a second. The clicking sound was gone. There was no noise at all. Come to think of it, it was dead silence. I didn't even hear any birds. I looked down the well one more time. Still pitch blackness. With that, I turned and ran through the woods, making it to my car much faster than I made it to the church, albeit completely out of breath. I cut the day short and didn't explore the other places on my list. This was just one of those experiences where you don't know what to think and you just drive. Home in silence with the music off, I didn't give up my hobby of exploring entirely, but I took a break. I was admittedly very spooked. I hope it was just some other kids exploring in there trying to mess with people. But I don't know when I think about it. That sounds really unlikely. This happened to me a while ago and is still stuck in my mind. Me and my friends often like to be in the outdoors. I'll refer to my friends as John and Anthony. We were bored and decided to go fishing deep in the woods near some farmland. We were chased out by a farmer and his dog. We tried to hide, but his dog found us and he threatened to call the police even though he was already on the phone with his friend, which we found weird. Honestly, we kind of found it funny. So, for whatever reason, we thought it would be a good idea to go back the next day and sneak onto the property to explore it. It was nearing about an hour before dark, and this property was huge, acres upon acres. We had to hike through some deep woods, similar to the one we had been fishing in before. Although we scoped it out on Google Maps, it was still easy to get lost. I remember thinking to myself that we should be out of there before dark. At first, everything seemed normal, and I wasn't getting any bad gut feelings. We were admiring the horses and petting them. I remember thinking it was weird having all this farmland and only horses. I compared it in my head to my uncle's farm, which is a lot smaller, but has about 10 different types of animals, not just one. I just brushed it off and thought that maybe the owner specialized in horses. After walking through the woods, we reached the fence, bordering the property. John was leading the way. I was in the middle, and Anthony was behind us. This is when we stumbled upon a rundown house with multiple trophy cars and a broken-down RV. We were shocked at the discovery and snuck around some of the cars. There was also a very creepy rundown shed. It was crazy to see. I even took this video. Fucking Court Raptors Bentley. Holy shit. There were multiple Porsches, Range Rovers, Ford Raptors, Bentley sports cars, Corvettes, and Ferrari. The deeper we got and the more cars we saw, we realized we probably shouldn't be seeing this. Since some of the cars were parted out, we suspected it was probably a criminal ring stealing cars. After we had seen all the cars, John decided it was a good idea to explore the inside of the camper, while Anthony kept lookout. I held the door open for John since he's kind of the smallest, so I thought he would be best suited to explore it. There was evidence somebody was living there, fishing rods, fresh food bedding, and other stuff. Although the camper was run down, we understood it was somebody's home, so we got out of there. I forgot to mention there were also car tires inside. We were not there to break or destroy anything, just look around. We snuck around to the back of the property where all the cars were. They were side-by-sides, and we made the connection that they were probably used to run the property. There was also a rundown shed, and when we went inside the back of it, we caught a foul, horrible smell. We kind of just brushed it off and laughed, joking that maybe it could be a body. None of us really believed it though. Then we heard the gate at the entrance of the property open and slam. It was about 1,000 feet away. We were heading back to the wood line because we didn't want anyone to see us. And that's when a van turned onto the street we were on. It was nearing dusk, and the headlights were on, so we sprinted through the woods. Not sure if he saw us. This is when we probably should have left, but we decided to explore the other side of the property. After walking along the outskirts and hiking through more woods, there were a lot more horses, but we finally got to the main house of the property. Again, it seemed very run down. About 25 feet to the right was another camper, or at least what looked like a camper. It was massive, about 50 feet long, and probably hadn't moved in 50 years. We almost missed it because it was completely covered in vines. Right next to it was another rundown jet ski also covered in vines. We managed to get the door open, but didn't want to make too much noise since we were so close to the main house. Yeah, even though it seemed abandoned, we wanted to be cautious. Not just because we were trespassing, but because there was similar suspicious stuff on both ends of the property, which I could only assume was connected to the car stealing ring. I knew if we were caught, it would be a problem. We snuck around the house and saw what was probably the most luxurious car on the property. Although it was run down and old, it was still an amazing sports car, a Ferrari. I didn't get a picture or a video, since we were still near the main house, and the horses were making a lot of noise. We got sketched out on the far end of the property. There was a boat and cooler inside a fridge. John looked around the boat and the cooler was about 15 feet into some very thick vegetation. We joked about the probability of a body being in there. At this point, the mood was still kind of jokey because we were exploring something we weren't supposed to see. When we got closer to the freezer, another terrible smell came, like the smell of death and rot. We decided to back off assuming the worst, and didn't want to open it in case there was something we really didn't want to see in there. We got a bad vibe, and we were on our way back. When Anthony started hearing things, we paused and listened with him, and we heard the noises too. I can't really describe them. I don't know if they were just normal wood noises, or if everything just seemed amplified because we were paranoid. The vegetation was about head high, and there was a rock that each of us took turns standing on to get a better view of the property. When John went up there, we were still laughing and joking. Then he turned to us, looking like he had just seen a ghost. He wouldn't speak, so I decided to get on the rock and look for myself. What I saw is seared into my brain over the vegetation. I saw a man sitting at a table with a black cat. That wasn't the scary part. When I looked at his face, there was no hair, no eyes, no mouth, no nose, no facial features at all. You can call me crazy, but I know what I saw. We were about 50 feet away, and it felt like the man was staring at us, but we genuinely couldn't see his eyes since he had no features. There was also a woman with him who made direct eye contact with me, and that was the moment she started running in a direction to cut us off from the property. I don't know if the man's featureless face was real or if he had white medical tape or bandages covering it. I still can't decide, but his face was pure white and his head was very small. I still can't get it out of my head. After that, it was still dark, and we had a long hike through the woods to get back to where we came from. We felt as if we were being followed almost the whole way, and we almost took a route that was 2 miles out just to get away. There were weird noises, like stomping feet, galloping, and screams. We tried to be quiet through the woods, but also tried to move quickly. We ended up making it back and made sure we weren't followed. I genuinely still don't know what that was, or if it was human. But I can't get this experience out of my head, and I know none of us will ever go back. I went to a quarry in McKinney, Texas, and I will never go back there again after what happened to me. Here is a little backstory, so this will make sense. The first time I went to this quarry, it was pretty sketchy. Me and a couple of my friends, Josh and Miles, went to this quarry for cliff jumping, since we had seen some YouTube videos of people cliff jumping at it, and we found out that it was only about a half-hour away from where we lived. Both Miles and I are old enough to drive, me being 16 and Miles being 17. So we thought that it would be a really good idea to go. Once we got to the quarry, it had a really sketchy vibe to it. There was a small dirt road that led up to the quarry, which made a circle around it. To the left were these ghetto-looking white buildings, which were pretty much just white metal boxes, and to the right was the fence that surrounded the rock path that led to the quarry. We drove down this road in Miles' Jeep, and there were tons of signs saying stuff like no trespassing or warning, blasting zone, and there was even this big white piece of cardboard that read trespassers will be shot on sight. It's important to note that in Texas, people can legally shoot you if you're on their property, but it just doesn't really happen much. We decided to drive back to the beginning of the road, where there was this gravel parking lot by an old building, which looked like it hadn't been touched in years. Miles parked the car and we all reluctantly got out of the car and began our walk to the quarry. While we were walking, a truck drove right past us and the driver just kind of looked at us with a blank expression on his face. Honestly, it was pretty scary when the car passed us, but the fact that he didn't do anything made us think maybe they don't care too much if we're on their property. We kept on walking, and then we came to the fence where we were supposed to jump to get onto the rock path that led to the quarry. We went to the smallest cliff jumping spot first and saw a pretty big snake swimming in the water after the first 10 minutes of being there. So we decided to wander further down the quarry, where we saw a decent-sized cliff, about 35 feet, after depth checking it. We spent about an hour cliff jumping there before we got bored and moved on to the next cliff. We were at the very end of the quarry, and we were walking down a path to get to a bigger spot, when we saw a black Hummer stop. The lady in the Hummer was probably in her mid-30s. She rolled down the window and yelled, "What the fuck are you doing on my property?" It honestly kind of shocked us all, and I responded with saying, in an innocent voice, "What do you mean?" We thought this was public property. She knew we were lying straight to her face, and yelled at us some more. Then she said something that I'll never forget. She picked up her phone and said, "John, get the gun." Me, Miles, and Josh all froze. We were scared to death. She said to follow her and drove slowly down the path, about 20 feet to a gate. We decided to follow her. We were all saying that we were so sorry, that we would never come back again, and she let us go after saying, "The cops are on their way, so you better haul ass that way before they get here," and pointed towards the dirt path that led us away from her property. We told her thank you and ran faster than any of us thought we could, and we got in the Jeep and drove away. I wish this was the end of the story, but it isn't. A couple of months later, Miles asked me if I would ever go to the quarry again, and I reluctantly told him that if we had a bigger group together, then I would go. We got a group of 5 together and went back to the quarry in my car. I drove, and after about an hour we arrived at a church, which we would be parking at, which was about 2 minutes away from the quarry. We didn't want the lady somehow seeing our car and getting our license plate number. We walked down the dirt road that led to the quarry and passed by a few cars. One car stopped next to us, and a guy who was probably in his early 20s told us to watch out for a black Hummer. We left and told him the story of what happened the first time that we went to the quarry, and then we were back to walking down the dirt road. We jumped the fence that surrounded the quarry and decided we would just go to the second spot, so that we would at least be a tiny bit out of sight of the dirt road. We were at the spot for about an hour and having fun when a silver van pulls up at the end of the dirt road about 25 yards away. It wasn't the black Hummer, so we weren't running away just yet, but we were getting our stuff ready in case we had to run. It was for the most part out of our sight due to trees being in between us and the van. We waited there for about a minute and thought that the guy was just doing something in the car, when we heard 2 loud gunshots really close to us. The gunshots scared us half to death. The exit of the quarry was not very close, probably about 300 yards and about 125 yards to get on the main dirt road, which led off the property. I led the way with my friend Aiden, trailing not far behind me. I heard more gunshots about 40 yards away, and it sounded like he had shot about 8 shots so far, but when I looked back, I couldn't see the guy who was shooting at us. We got to the fence and jumped it, and we were now on the main dirt road that led to the exit, out of pure luck. The guy we had talked to earlier who had warned us about the black Hummer was in his white truck on the dirt road. We begged him for a ride, and he gave us a ride back to the end of the property. We thanked him and then ran back to the car. We all got in the car and drove away, never to see that quarry again. Back in 2018, my cousin Ryan and I were really into urban exploration. We had been to old factories, shuttered schools, and forgotten farmhouses that looked like they were one good windstorm away from collapsing. We were not stupid about it. We checked floors before walking on them, wearing masks where there might be asbestos, and avoided any place that seemed like it might be actively guarded still. There was one place we'd been talking about for months, that neither of us had worked up the nerve to try: the big abandoned house on the shore of Lake Harlow. It was the kind of property you only ever saw from a distance, sitting far back from the main road behind a set of tall iron gates that had been bent inward years ago. Pines and brush had grown wild around the driveway, hiding most of the place unless you caught a glimpse through the trees. While driving past, local rumors about the place were endless. The most common story was that a wealthy family had lived there in the 90s before suddenly disappearing. People claimed they'd left in the middle of the night without taking anything. Furniture, clothes, dishes, even family photos were supposedly still inside. Theories ranged from financial ruin to witness protection to something even darker. No one had ever bought it afterward, and the property had just sat there decaying for more than 2 decades. The afternoon we went, the weather was gray, and still we parked at a hiking trailhead about a half-mile from the property, and we walked in through the woods to avoid being seen from the road. As we got closer, the roofline appeared through the trees, and I realized just how big the place really was. 3 stories with tall windows and a wide wraparound porch, all in various stages of rot. Paint peeled off in long strips like sunburnt skin, and sections of the porch sagged inward. We circled around to the back, moving quietly in case there was anyone nearby. The back door was unlocked, and the moment we stepped inside, the air changed. The air was still and smelled faintly of lake water and dust. The kitchen was the first thing we saw. It looked like a movie set frozen in time. Plates were stacked neatly on the counter, and a coffee cup with a brown ring of dried residue sat beside the sink. The cabinet stood open, showing old boxes of food that were long expired. A faded calendar on the wall still hung open to May 1997. We moved through the downstairs slowly. The living room still had furniture draped in yellowed sheets. The fireplace was still filled with crumbling ash, like the last fire had burned out decades ago. Family photos were hung in the hallway with people smiling at barbecues and dressed up for Christmas. Honestly, I got the chills. For some reason, As I looked at these photos, there was something eerie about seeing cheery family photos in a long abandoned house. Some of the photos had sun-faded so badly that their faces were almost ghostly. White upstairs is where things started to feel off. The first bedroom we entered had a perfectly made bed, but all the dresser drawers were open and completely empty. Another room's floor was entirely covered with newspapers from 1997, each one folded open to the classified ad section. I didn't think much of it until I noticed the dates. They were all from within the same week in July, and every circled AD was for private buyers looking for quiet transactions. The master bedroom was the strangest. The heavy curtains were drawn shut, but when I pulled them back, I found the windows had been boarded over from the inside. The closet door had a rusted padlock on it, and the floor in front of it was scratched as if someone had tried to drag something heavy out but couldn't. Ryan wanted to force it open, but I talked him out of it. We didn't have tools, and I wasn't eager to break something in a place where we weren't supposed to be. He suggested we check the basement before leaving. The basement door was in a narrow hallway off the kitchen when we opened it. A wave of damp, cool air came up that smelled strongly of mildew. The stairs were wooden. Each step down creaked like it might give way under us. The basement was big with thick stone walls and wooden shelves along one side. Most were empty, except for a few rusted cans and a broken lantern. But in the center of the room, illuminated in our flashlight beams, were 5 chairs, all mismatched and old, but arranged in a perfect circle. Unlike everything else in the house, they weren't dusty. The seats looked recently used. I was about to whisper something to Ryan when we both rose somewhere above us. A door closed. The sound was clear as day, and it was followed by footsteps crossing the floor above. We killed our lights instantly and stood in the dark, barely breathing. The footsteps paused, then started again, moving toward the hallway above the basement. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. We hadn't seen any cars outside. We hadn't heard anyone else since we got here. Whoever was up there hadn't made a sound until now. The footsteps stopped again, this time directly above the basement door. Then the sound of the door handle rattling made my blood run cold. Ryan grabbed my arm and pulled me toward the far end of the basement where a small ground-level window sat, broken and half covered by a rotting shutter. It was barely big enough to fit through, but we didn't care. I went first, scraping my jacket on the glass, dropping down into damp dirt outside. Ryan was right behind me. We sprinted into the tree line, not daring to look back until we were well into the woods. When I finally did glance over my shoulder, I saw the basement door wide open and someone standing in it. They were too far away to make out any details, just tall and still, and it looked like their head was tilted slightly, like they were watching us. We didn't stop running until we reached the car. Both of us were so disturbed that we barely even spoke on the car ride home. That night, I just kept replaying it in my head. Everything from the chairs to the footsteps to the locked closet, and then that horrifying image of that figure on the porch. So a couple weeks later, Ryan called me and told me that after he made a post in a Facebook group asking if anyone knows about the history of that house, an older guy responded to his post saying that there have been sightings of someone in that house, and the first guest would of course be a squatter. However, that wouldn't explain the strange, almost ritualistic-looking circle of chairs in the basement. At this point, it's not my problem to worry about. I'm just happy we got out of there in one piece. My name is Mike, and this happened last year when my fiancé and I bought our first starter home together. We're an Asian couple, which is relevant to the story. It was a small 2-story house in a basic suburban town in Georgia. There was nothing special about it, but to us it was supposed to be special. It was a typical quiet street, decent backyard, cheap fence, and regular-looking houses lined up next to each other. We felt lucky to even buy a house at our age, so it was a very exciting point in our lives that was quite literally robbed from us. which you'll soon hear why the first few days were normal. We unpacked, met a few neighbors, and tried to settle in. The neighbor on our right side was a friendly older couple. The neighbor across the street waved and came across to say hi when he saw us. But the house on our left side was different. We didn't see anyone come out of it for the first few days. The curtains were always shut. The house looked clean and normal. Don't get me wrong, but it was always kind of dark inside, like no one was home, even though there was a car in the driveway. The only time we noticed anything was when we saw someone standing inside their front window. One afternoon, my fiancée and I were carrying groceries in front the car, when she whispered something to me about it. I looked over and saw a man standing behind the curtain, only half visible, but totally watching us. He didn't wave. As soon as he saw us glance at him, he walked away from the window. It was weird, but we didn't think too much about it. Some people are just quiet or awkward. Over the next week, we started noticing him more often, not outside, but inside his house. I would catch him standing in his living room window sometimes. When I left for work, my fiancée told me she saw him in the upstairs window once when she was getting the mail. Every time we noticed him, he seemed to be watching us, but never in a way where he stayed long. The second we looked back, he was gone. One night something happened that made both of us uneasy in a way we couldn't ignore. Around midnight, I was getting ready for bed when I walked past our upstairs window. Our bedroom window faced directly toward his house. When I looked out of habit, I saw him in his upstairs window. This time he wasn't halfway hidden or standing behind a curtain. He was fully visible. He stood straight up with his face turned toward our bedroom window. I froze for a second because I wasn't sure if I was actually seeing it right. But the second he realized I saw him, he stepped back away from the window. I remember saying to my fiancée with a laugh, "Oh great, our neighbor's a creep." The next morning the man came to our door. It was the first time we saw him outside. He knocked politely and introduced himself as Gordon. He apologized for looking like he was spying the night before. He told me he had been putting something on his window ledge and didn't mean to look into our room. He smiled the whole time, and it was a welcoming enough smile to give me a bit of relief. I'm not saying I loved the guy instantly. There was definitely something slightly off about him, but the apology was appreciated. I didn't want to be rude, so I told him it was fine. When I went back inside, I told my fiancé. He seemed somewhat nice, but a little weird. We decided to forget about it. A week later, something else happened that we couldn't ignore. In the middle of the night, my fiancée shook me awake, telling me she heard someone in the yard. I was half asleep, but I got up to check the window. Gotta do what you gotta do, as the man of the house. When I looked outside, I saw someone walking in our yard, unless it was fucking Bigfoot. It was definitely a person. A full-grown man walking around like he was looking for something. My first reaction was to shout out, "Hey," even though I knew that wasn't the smartest thing to do. As soon as I yelled, the person walked fast toward the gate and slammed it shut behind him, since we didn't have anything in the backyard yet. Besides some gardening tools, I didn't think someone was trying to steal anything, and I didn't bother to check the backyard. I did check the front windows though, and didn't see anyone. I didn't go outside because I didn't feel safe, and eventually my fiancé and I went back to sleep, even though we felt uneasy. A few nights after that, the same thing happened again. My fiancé woke me up telling me she heard rustling outside. This time we both heard it clearly. It sounded like someone was shimmying something. I can't say what, but best description I could give was some kind of lock. I went to the window again, and sure enough, I saw someone in the backyard. I felt my whole body tense up. This time I yelled that I was calling the cops. The person walked out of the yard and again slammed the gate the same way. But this time I saw enough of the man's face and posture to know it looked exactly like Gordon. I yelled Gordon, but he didn't respond. He just walked away like nothing happened this time. I went outside. I checked the yard, then the sides of the house. I took a deep breath and told myself, I have to confront this now. I walked over to Gordon's house and knocked. He answered within seconds, which told me he was awake the whole time. He smiled like he always did, and started laughing while telling me that it was him in the yard. He said he was chasing away kids who always jumped the fences in the neighborhood, and he caught them jumping from his backyard into our backyard. He said, "It happens all the time," and told me I'd get used to it. He kept smiling the whole time, but something about the smile didn't feel normal. It felt like something was behind it. I saw hate in his eyes, I swear. I didn't argue with him. I just told him I understood and went back home. But deep down, I didn't believe a word he said. The next day he came over again and invited us to come to his house for Chinese food. The next night, which would be a Friday, we felt like saying yes would at least clear the awkwardness between us and we could just be cordial neighbors. We went to his house around 7 p.m. that Friday. The second we walked in, the atmosphere felt uncomfortable. Gordon seems relatively intoxicated and got only more drunk as he kept sipping more wine. He said he ordered a bunch of Chinese food and made a little weird comment like, "I know you guys love Chinese food," then left. He made little passive-aggressive comments here and there. Eventually the food arrived and he paid, and we offered to help him set up the table, but he almost yelled when he said no. The whole dinner felt tense. Then, as he finished more and more wine, he started acting more differently. He started making rude comments that were less passive and more direct. He said things that made it pretty clear he didn't like that. An Asian couple moved into the neighborhood. At first, we tried ignoring it, hoping it would stop, but then he got louder and more angry. I mean it. He actually started getting himself angry as he talked about how this town had a history of being white. He started saying things that made both of us feel unsafe, honestly. Then he told us that it was in fact him going into our backyard those nights. He didn't deny it or try to hide it. The climax of the night was when he yelled at us that we were not welcome there and that the neighborhood wasn't for people like us. At that point, we didn't say anything. We just stood up and left. We walked back to our house as fast as we could. We didn't even talk about it until we were inside, with the doors locked. We didn't know what to do except go to the other neighbors. So we walked door to door, asking them about Gordon. Some of them were shocked when we told them what happened. Others weren't surprised at all. A few people told us Gordon was a drunk whose wife left him years ago. It didn't make us feel any better because we were living next to him. Now we tried to avoid him after that. We didn't look at his house. We didn't go outside unless we had to. But how long could you avoid your next-door neighbor? Every night felt tense, like he could be watching us or trespassing again. Then one night, a brick was thrown through our downstairs window. It shattered glass all over the living room. We both jumped out of bed when we heard it. When I ran downstairs, the brick was lying on the floor. No note detached or anything, just a brick. We knew it was Gordon. There was no one else it could have been, but we had no proof. We filed a police report. The police came to talk to him, but he denied everything. He acted confused and told them he had nothing to do with it. The police couldn't do anything except document the incident. We talked about putting up cameras and staying to fight it out, but honestly, we were too scared and this was mentally exhausting already. We both felt like something worse would happen if we stayed. Not even 2 months after moving in, we started packing again. We couldn't live next to someone who hated us and had already gone into our yard at night and then thrown a brick at our house. Before we left, we filed another report explaining everything the police said. They would keep an eye on the situation, but we didn't feel protected. We moved out of that house and out of that neighborhood as fast as we could. We left behind the home we thought would be our first chapter in life together. I still think if we stayed there, you'd have eventually heard of my fiancé and I on the news having been murdered by this man. I wish it wasn't illegal to dox people. Boy, would I love to drop his address in this story. All we can do now is move on and upward from here. This story happened a couple of years ago, around late 2021. My name is Noah, and me and my fiancée Gabby, who is now my wife, had moved into a new house in a quiet suburban neighborhood. It was a nice 2-story house, perfect for our future family. The neighbors seemed friendly and welcoming as well. Most notably, the neighbors that lived to the right of us seemed the friendliest. It was a couple in their late 30s, but I wasn't really sure. The husband's name was Daniel, and his wife was named Veronica. They were very friendly and seemed like sweet people. They even baked us a red velvet cake as a little welcoming gift. The cake was really good, and we couldn't thank them enough for it. The first couple of weeks were good in the new neighborhood. It was quiet and peaceful until we started noticing strange things with our neighbors, Daniel and Veronica. One night around 11 p.m. I heard shouting coming from outside. I looked out my bedroom window and realized it was coming from their house, like they were arguing. I couldn't see them because the angle of the house has blocked my view. Eventually I saw Veronica storm out to her car and leave. After that, it was quiet again. I told Gabby about it, and we just chalked it up to them getting into an argument and Veronica leaving to cool off. I was kind of concerned because they seemed like such sweet people. Not the type to have heated arguments, but every couple has disagreements. We didn't think too much of it. Later on that same week, Gabby and I were coming back home. When we got out of the car, we heard yelling coming from inside their house again. They had their main door open, but the storm door was closed, so we could hear them arguing clearly. Again, it wasn't our business, so we ignored it. Then one day I noticed Veronica's car wasn't there. For a few days, but I assumed maybe she was on vacation. Daniel was still there, because his car stayed parked, and I would see him go out once in a while. But then it became a week, then 2 weeks, and Veronica's car was still gone. My wife noticed too, and thought maybe they got divorced or something, which would make sense due to their constant arguing. But the way she left was so sudden. One day, her car was there. The next day was gone, and Daniel was acting weird every time we saw him. He would try to avoid us. He wouldn't wave like neighbors usually do, and the rare times I talked to him, he would talk fast and try to end the conversation as soon as possible, like he was nervous. Something was definitely up with him. After 3 weeks of Veronica being gone, I decided to go over and ask Daniel how things were. My fiancé argued against it, saying it wasn't our business, and to leave it alone. But curiosity got the best of me, and I knew she was curious too. So I rang his doorbell. I knew he was home because his car was there. It took him almost 3 minutes to answer, and when he did, he looked off. He was sweating, like he just ran a marathon, and he had this weird forced smile like he was hiding something. I asked him about Veronica, and why I haven't seen her or her car in a while. He hesitated and said, she just went to go stay with her mom for a while, out of state, because she's very sick, and she's looking after her. I felt like that was a lie, but I didn't question it. I might have believed him if he wasn't acting so strange. I then asked why he was sweating so much, and he said he was doing workouts upstairs. He was speaking really fast, like he was rushed or nervous, but then something happened that made my heart drop. I heard a voice scream from somewhere inside the house. I wasn't exactly sure where, but I was almost positive. It was a woman's voice yelling for help. I asked what that was, and Daniel quickly said, I'm playing a movie upstairs and forgot to pause it. That made no sense, since he had just said he was working out upstairs. I just said, okay, and told him I would catch him later. I went back home and told Gabby everything. She was just as concerned as me, and told me to call the cops. I did, and I requested to stay anonymous, even though Daniel would probably know it was me. I told the dispatcher that I heard something in my neighbor's house and wanted them to do a welfare check. Eventually, an officer pulled up. About 10 minutes later, I heard sirens and saw 5 police cars and an ambulance. Me and Gabby rushed outside. Officers were everywhere. Daniel was being taken away in handcuffs while Veronica was being rushed to the ambulance on the stretcher. We later found out Daniel and Veronica had been in an abusive relationship, and things had escalated badly. Daniel kept her locked in the basement for weeks. I didn't even know they had a basement down there. He would assault her, abuse her, and do horrible things. He even sold her car to make it look like she wasn't home. When I heard that scream while talking to him, it turned out he stabbed her 5 times because she had made noise when he told her to be quiet while he answered the door. That explained why he was acting so strange. Unfortunately, Veronica didn't survive and passed a couple hours later as Daniel was being escorted into a police car. He said, "I know it was you who snitched on me, and you'll regret this." I wanted to laugh it off if the situation wasn't so messed up, knowing he would be behind bars for a long time. It's crazy how you never know who people truly are behind closed doors. Daniel seems like a friendly, normal guy, and so did Veronica. They seemed like a great couple, but obviously they had serious issues hidden underneath. Fast forward a couple nights after the incident, I woke up in the middle of the night. It was dark, and I saw the silhouette of a person. As my eyes adjusted, I saw that it was Daniel. My heart dropped. He said, "I told you you would regret this." He was holding a knife. I tried talking him down, telling him to calm down and just talk, but he didn't respond. I pressed myself against the headboard. Then, out of nowhere, he lunged at me. I screamed, and then I woke up for real. I was breathing heavily, and Gabby was beside me. She asked what was wrong, and I said it was just a bad dream. She went back to sleep, but I couldn't. The fact that I dreamed about my neighbor, who murdered his wife, breaking into my house to kill me, chills me. To this day, most dreams fade, but this one stayed vivid, and the words he said in the dream were the exact same ones. He said while being taken away in cuffs, "I never told my wife about this dream. I don't know why. I guess because she might think I'm crazy, or it would just stress her out." Eventually, after we got married, we moved to another part of town. It's a nice, quiet neighborhood and a great house, but the whole event traumatized us. Knowing we live next to a murderer still haunts us. My name is Devin, and this happened 2 years ago when I was 24 and living in a duplex in Queens, New York. It was a small old house that looked divided right down the middle. I rented the left side, and some man rented the right side. I never met him. I never even saw him. The landlord said he kept to himself and worked nights, so it didn't concern me. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor, and the wall of my bedroom was the same wall as the neighbor's bedroom. If I pressed my ear up to the wall, I could hear faint movements on the other side sometimes, but that's to be expected in New York City. The first week that I lived there, nothing strange happened. I worked long hours, came home tired, ate something simple, and went straight to bed. I was just happy to have my own place. And then one night things began. I was lying in bed, scrolling on my phone, and I heard what sounded like a man talking, but it didn't sound like a normal man's voice. It was high-pitched, like someone trying to talk in a fake voice. It was faint, and it was being spoken from the other room, but the wall was so thin that it felt like the person was standing right next to me. I couldn't understand what he was saying. It was just this weird high voice, mumbling. I tried to ignore it. Maybe he was on the phone, or maybe he was watching something on TV. Eventually, the mumbling stopped, and I fell asleep. A few nights later though, the mumbling came back, but this time it was louder, and this time it was definitely a man talking. I pressed my ear lightly to the wall and listened. It didn't sound like he was on the phone. It sounded like he was talking to himself. I didn't know whether to laugh or be slightly creeped out to block the noise out. I put the blanket over my head. I had work early the next morning, and I needed sleep. I think that was the first night I realized I did not like living there alone. 2 weeks after that, the knock started. I was lying in bed again, half asleep, when I heard 2 taps on the wall right next to my head. It was so close that I flinched like someone was touching me. I sat up and waited a few moments in silence, and then, there were 2 more identical taps on the wall from the other side. I knew for sure that it was not a house-settling noise that could just easily be explained away. I rolled away from the wall and sat there shaking. I kept waiting to hear something else, but it went quiet. I wanted to knock back, but I realized that acknowledging it would likely make it worse the next morning. I told myself it was not a big deal and that I was overreacting. Over the next week, the knocks continued, sometimes soft, sometimes harder. Always at night, and always when I was trying to sleep one night. It went on for so long that I put in headphones and turned on a loud fan. I remember lying awake, thinking about how thin the wall was, how close his room was, how close he was. He could literally be lying just 2 feet away from me. It scared me more every night, but still. The knocks could have just been him sitting against the wall and accidentally banging or tapping the wall with something. But then came the night that everything changed. I'll never forget. I was lying in bed on my side facing the wall. My eyes were closed, but I was not asleep yet. The room was dark, except for my street lamp shining through the blinds. I heard the knocks. Again, 3 slow ones. I kept my eyes closed and tried not to react. Then, I heard that same high-pitched man's voice come through the wall. It was muffled, but not that muffled. I could hear each word clear enough. He said, "What are you doing in there?" My lungs locked up. I sat straight up in bed, shaking so hard, I felt my teeth shattering. This was no longer just potential accidental taps on the wall. He was now acknowledging me directly. He said it straight through the wall. I could just tell. He said it like he knew I was right next to him. I grabbed my phone and called my boyfriend. I whispered to him that I was scared, out of my mind, and told him exactly what happened. He told me he was coming over right away and he would stay the night with me. I stayed sitting up with the lights on until he arrived. The rest of the night, nothing happened. It was almost worse that way. It made me feel crazy, like the neighbor knew my boyfriend was there for a few days. Things were quiet. I started thinking maybe it was just some weird coincidence that the neighbor was doing something and I misheard. But then a few nights later, something happened that made me leave the house running. I still have bad dreams about it. I was asleep this time, fully asleep. I don't know what time it was when I woke up, but I woke up fast. Something snapped me awake. I sat up slightly, and then it started the knocks on the wall, like someone drumming their fingers right beside my head. I screamed back without thinking. I shouted for whoever it was to leave me alone. I was shaking and breathing hard. I think mustering up the courage to finally yell back spiked my adrenaline. I don't know exactly what I expected next, but I will tell you what did happen next. I never expected in a million years there was a voice. It came from inside my room. A voice in the dark said, "Go to sleep." It was not the voice from the wall. It was deeper and closer, right there in my room. I launched off my bed, screaming for some reason. The brief moments of my running through the hallway and down the stairs was a blur, because I really just remember getting outside and running into the streets, screaming for help. Over and over, I must have looked insane. I ran barefoot onto the sidewalk. I kept looking behind me, expecting someone to be chasing me. I didn't stop screaming until a man 2 houses down came outside and stared at me like he didn't know what to do. I begged him to let me use his phone to call my boyfriend, but he said by the sound of it, I needed to call the police. So I called the police instead. I waited by that man's sidewalk, shaking and crying until the police arrived. When they showed up, I told them everything that happened. They asked me if I was sure that someone was in the house, and I said, yes, 100%, yes. They drove me back to my duplex, and 2 officers went inside. My front door was still wide open, like I left it. They said there were no signs of forced entry. They asked me if I remembered unlocking the door as I ran out. I had no memory of touching the lock. I told them I didn't think I unlocked it, but I was so panicked that maybe I did. I couldn't be sure. They checked every room, every closet under the bed, everywhere. No one was in the house. They knocked on the neighbor's door too, but he wouldn't open up. It looked like he wasn't home at all. Eventually my boyfriend showed up and took me back to his place. I was still shaking hours later. I don't remember sleeping again the rest of the night. In the morning, I called my landlord and told him everything I told him. I needed to know who the neighbor was and if he had any history of problems or strange behavior. I also told him I wanted to break the lease immediately. At first he pushed back. He said he needed notice and paperwork. I told him I would not step foot in that duplex alone again, and he needed to help me. It took a whole day of phone calls before he said he would let me break the lease. My boyfriend came with me every single time. I went back to the duplex to move my stuff. I refused to go alone. During those days, we tried knocking on the neighbor's door multiple times, but he never answered. It was like no one lived there, but there were signs that someone did, like packages at the door and a car in the driveway, but no human response. I ended up moving back in with my parents for a while until I found a new place. I still don't know if that neighbor was actually in my room that night, or if someone got in without the police noticing, or if it was just all in my head from the stress. But that one's the least likely explanation, because it's pretty clear what's real and what's in your head. My landlord told me later that the neighboring tenant eventually moved out to bait without saying a word. I don't know what really happened in that duplex.